A glittering charity gala, 500 guests, cameras broadcasting live, and then the kiss that destroyed everything. Derek Morrison, millionaire mogul, pulled his mistress onto the stage and kissed her while his pregnant wife watched backstage. But that was just the beginning. What followed was a calculated destruction so complete, it should have been impossible to survive. Yet Claire Morrison didn't just survive. She fought back. And what she discovered would bring down an empire built on lies. This is the story of what happens when a powerful man underestimates the woman he tried to erase. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your location. Subscribe for more stories. And let's begin. The champagne flute felt cold against Claire Morrison's fingertips as she stood backstage at the Riverview Grand Hotel ballroom. Through the gap in the velvet curtains, she could see 500 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits, their faces glowing under crystal chandeliers. Television cameras lined the perimeter. This was the charity gala of the season, and her husband Derek was about to make the announcement that would change their lives. Claire glanced down at her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with their first child. The ivory dress she wore had been specially tailored to accommodate her growing frame while still maintaining elegance. In her other hand, she clutched note cards for the speech she would give after Derek introduced their new foundation, the Morrison Family Initiative for Homeless Families in the City. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek's voice boomed through the speakers, smooth and commanding. Thank you for joining us tonight. Claire smiled, remembering how they had rehearsed this moment together just 2 days ago in their penthouse. Or had they? The memory felt fuzzy now. Derek had been distant lately, always on his phone, always claiming another business emergency. But that was normal for a real estate mogul. Wasn't it Morrison Properties had developments in 12 states? The pressure was immense. Her sister Rachel's warning from this morning echoed in her mind. Something feels wrong. Claire, I've been digging into some rumors, and Derek's been meeting with people he shouldn't be meeting with. Claire had dismissed it. Rachel was an investigative journalist, always seeing conspiracies where there were none. Derek loved her. They were building something beautiful together. She had left her position as executive director of Citywide Hope nonprofit to support his vision, to be his partner in creating a business empire with a conscience. On stage, Derek continued his speech. Tonight is about authenticity. It's about living your truth, no matter the cost. Claire frowned. That wasn't in the script they had discussed. She leaned closer to the monitor showing the live feed. For too long, Derek said, his voice dropping to an intimate register. I've been living a lie, but tonight, that ends. Claire's heart began to race. What was he doing? Derek gestured off stage, toward the opposite wing from where Claire stood. I want to introduce someone very special to me, someone who has shown me what real passion looks like. A woman stepped into the lights. She was younger than Claire, maybe 27, with golden hair cascading over bare shoulders. Her dress was the color of champagne, clinging to her figure like liquid silk. Claire recognized her immediately. Brooke Sullivan, the social media influencer Derek had hired 3 months ago as the brand ambassador for Morrison Properties. The woman who had been tagged in Instagram stories at Derek's office. The woman whose dress size matched the designer box Claire had found in their closet yesterday. Time seemed to slow as Derek took Brooke's hand and pulled her close. The camera zoomed in. 500 guests held their breath. And Derek Morrison kissed Brooke Sullivan on stage, in front of everyone, while his pregnant wife watched from behind a curtain. The kiss lasted 10 seconds. 10 seconds that would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform by morning. 10 seconds that shattered Claire's entire world. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her hand instinctively went to her rectum, protecting the child inside from the shockwaves radiating through her body. On screen, Derek broke the kiss and smiled at the cameras. My marriage has been dead for years. Tonight, I choose to live authentically. I choose freedom. I choose her. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Gasps and shouts overlapped. Phones appeared like fireflies. Everyone recording, everyone posting. Within 60 seconds, #Morrison Scandal was trending nationally. Claire felt hands on her shoulders. A security guard was trying to guide her away from the curtain, away from the stage, away from the destruction of her life being broadcast to the world. Ma'am, we need to move you somewhere private, the guard said gently. But Claire couldn't look away from the monitor. Derek was still talking, still smiling. while Brooke clung to his arm like a trophy. The man she had loved for 6 years, the man whose child she carried, had just performed the cruelest act of betrayal she could imagine, and he had done it as entertainment. Her phone buzzed. Text messages flooded in. "Rachel, I'm coming to you right now. Don't move." Her former assistant from the nonprofit, "Oh my God, Claire, I'm so sorry." A college friend, "What the hell is happening?" The stage lights seemed too bright suddenly. The room spun. Claire gripped the curtain for support as her knees buckled. "I need to see what else he's going to do," she whispered. Because somehow, in the part of her brain still functioning through the shock, Claire Morrison knew that this public humiliation was only the beginning. Rachel Foster burst through the backstage door, her journalist credentials still hanging around her neck. She found Claire sitting on a folding chair, staring at the monitor where Derek and Brooke were now posing for photographs like they had just announced an engagement instead of destroying a marriage. "We're leaving," Rachel said firmly, grabbing Claire's arm. "No." Claire's voice was quiet but steady. "I need to hear all of it. Claire, Asuna, he's humiliating you on live television." "Then let him finish. I want to know exactly who I married." On stage, Derek had taken the microphone again. The crowd had settled into an uncomfortable silence, half the room recording on their phones, the other half simply staring in disbelief. "I know this is unconventional," Derek said, that practiced smile never wavering. "But I've learned that life is too short for pretending. My wife and I, we were never really partners. We were playing roles. She wanted the lifestyle, the status. I wanted someone who actually understood ambition." Claire felt Rachel's hand tighten on her shoulder. Each word was a calculated strike, designed to rewrite their history, to paint her as a gold digger, to justify what he was doing. "But enough about the past," Derek continued. "Tonight is about the future. Brooke and I are building something real, something passionate, something that doesn't involve obligation or guilt." A voice rose from the crowd. Thomas Grant, the chairman of Morrison Properties Board of Directors, stood from his table. "Derek, this is neither the time nor the place for personal announcements. You're representing the company." Derek's smile tightened. "With all due respect, Thomas, I'm the majority shareholder. I am the company." "Well, you're making a spectacle that will have consequences," Thomas warned. For a moment, Derek's mask slipped. Claire saw it on the monitor, brighter, a flash of anger in his eyes. But then he laughed, easy and dismissive. "The only consequence will be honesty." Finally, Claire stood, her legs steadier now. The shock was giving way to something else, something colder and clearer. She looked at Rachel. "I'm going out there." "Claire, don't. He wants a reaction." "Then I'll give him one he doesn't expect." Before Rachel could stop her, Claire walked through the curtain and onto the stage. The crowd's murmur became a wave of caps. Every camera swung toward her, every phone raised higher. Derek's expression flickered. Surprise. Calculation. Then something almost like satisfaction. He had anticipated this. He wanted this. Claire walked slowly, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, until she stood 10 feet from her husband and his mistress. She didn't look at Brooke. She kept her eyes on Derek. "You're destroying our child's future on live television," Claire said, her voice carried clearly through the microphone system, calm and controlled. "That's who you are now." The room went completely silent. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but Thomas Grant was faster. The board chairman stood again, his face flushed with anger. "Derek Morrison, you have crossed every line of professional and personal decency. Consider your position with this company in serious jeopardy." A smattering of applause began. It grew. Within seconds, half the ballroom was clapping, not for Derek, but for Claire, for her composure, for her dignity in the face of calculated cruelty. For just a moment, Claire felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the truth would win. Maybe Derek had miscalculated. Maybe she wouldn't face this alone. Then Derek reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. "Since we're being honest," he said, his voice cutting through the applause, "let's be completely honest." He opened the folder and held up documents for the cameras. "These are emails from Claire's time at Citywide Hope nonprofit. Emails showing systematic embezzlement, $230,000, funneled through fake vendor accounts, all during the year before she married me." The applause died instantly. Claire felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. That's not true. Bank records don't lie, Derek said smoothly. Neither do forensic accountants. I've known about this for months, but I wanted to protect her. I wanted to believe we could work through it privately. But clearly, she's more interested in playing the victim. He turned to the crowd, his performance flawless. Why do you think she left that nonprofit so suddenly? Why do you think she was so eager to marry me? She needed someone to hide behind. Claire's vision blurred at the edges. This was impossible. She had never stolen anything. She had left the nonprofit to support him because he had asked her to, because he had convinced her they would do more good together. But looking at the faces in the crowd, she saw doubt creeping in. Some people were nodding. Others were whispering behind their hands. The narrative was shifting in real time. You fabricated this, Claire said, her voice shaking now. You're lying. Derek's smile was almost pitying. I think we both know who the liar is here. And honestly, I'm not even sure the baby is mine. The words hit like a physical blow. Claire stumbled backward, her hand clutching at her chest. The room spun violently. She tried to breathe, but her lungs wouldn't cooperate. Rachel was suddenly there, arms around her. Claire, breathe, just breathe. But Claire couldn't breathe. The stress, the shock, the betrayal, it was all crashing down at once. She felt wetness between her legs, looked down, saw red spreading across her ivory dress. Oh God, someone in the crowd said. Call an ambulance. Thomas Grant shouted. The last thing Claire saw before the darkness claimed her was Derek's face on the monitor. And for just a fraction of a second, beneath the performance, she saw what was really there. Satisfaction. He had planned this. All of it. The kiss, the accusations, her inevitable confrontation. He had orchestrated her complete destruction, and he was pleased with how perfectly it was unfolding. Then the world went black, and Claire Morrison collapsed on the stage where her husband had just murdered her reputation in front of millions. Claire woke to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of a heart monitor. For a blissful moment, she didn't remember. Then it all came crashing back. She tried to sit up, but Rachel was there, gently pressing her shoulders down. Don't move. The baby's okay, but you're on bed rest for the next 48 hours minimum. How long was I out? 3 hours. They gave you something to stabilize you and the baby. Claire, you were bleeding. They thought... Rachel's voice broke. They thought you might lose her. Claire's hand went to her belly. She felt the reassuring swell, felt a small movement beneath her palm. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He did this. He knew what it would do to me. And he did it anyway. Rachel pulled a chair close to the hospital bed. Her eyes were red, her expression harder than Claire had ever seen it. It's everywhere, every news outlet, every social media platform. The video has 20 million views already. What are they saying? Rachel hesitated. Some people are defending you, but Derek's team is pushing the embezzlement story hard. They're calling you a con artist, a gold digger who got caught and is now playing victim. Claire closed her eyes. None of it's true. I never stole anything. I know, but he has documents. Claire, forged or not, they look real. And he's got his PR manager, Wendy Blackwell, spinning this across every outlet. By morning, the dominant narrative will be that you're the villain and he's the wounded party. A nurse entered with a tray of medications. She smiled sympathetically. How are we feeling, Mrs. Morrison? Don't call me that, Claire said quietly. Please. After the nurse left, Rachel showed Claire her phone. The headlines were brutal. Morrison's wife embezzler or victim. Charity director accused of massive fraud. Pregnant gold digger collapses after exposure. But worse than the headlines were the comments, thousands of them, most viciously condemning her. People who had never met her, declaring her guilty, calling her names, speculating about her motives and her character. How is this legal? Claire whispered. How can he just lie like this? Because he has money and lawyers and a PR machine. And right now, you have none of those things. Rachel's jaw tightened. But I'm digging. Claire, I've got contacts looking into those documents. If they're fake, we'll prove it. A soft knock interrupted them. A man in an expensive suit stood in the doorway, holding a leather briefcase. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Garrett Price. I'm a family law attorney. Your sister contacted me. Over the next 30 minutes, Garrett laid out the nightmare Claire hadn't even begun to understand. Derek had filed for divorce that afternoon, while she was unconscious. He was seeking a restraining order, claiming she was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. Dangerous, Claire's voice cracked. I'm 7 months pregnant and on bed rest. He's also claiming you threatened him in the past. He has texts he says are from you, threatening to destroy his reputation if he ever left you. I never sent anything like that. Garrett nodded grimly. I believe you, but here's the bigger problem. You signed a prenuptial agreement 6 years ago. Do you remember the terms? Claire tried to think back to their wedding, to the stack of papers Derek's lawyer had presented. She had been so in love, so trusting. She had barely read them. It said something about protecting his business interests. It said that in the event of divorce, you waive all claims to any assets acquired during the marriage, including property, investments, and business holdings. You would be entitled only to whatever you brought into the marriage, which according to these records was approximately $14,000 in savings. The room tilted again. That can't be right. I worked. I contributed. You left your job to support his career. Legally, that doesn't matter. The prenup is ironclad. Garrett paused. But there's more. He's suing you for defamation. He's claiming that by denying his embezzlement accusations publicly, you've damaged his reputation and business relationships. He's seeking $5 million in damages. Claire laughed, a hollow, broken sound. I don't have $5 million. I don't have $5,000. Exactly, problem, which means if you fight him in court and they lose, you'll face bankruptcy and potentially wage garnishment for life. You'll never recover financially. Rachel stood abruptly. This is insane. He can't do this. He can. And he is. Garrett's expression was sympathetic but honest. He's offering a settlement. If Claire signs an NDO, admits the embezzlement was a misunderstanding, accepts $50,000, and agrees never to speak publicly about him or their marriage, he'll drop the defamation suit. 50,000. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. He's worth $200 million. Take it or face trial. Those are your options. And Mrs. Morrison, I have to be honest with you. If this goes to trial, but with his resources and those forged documents, you'll likely lose. You could face criminal charges for the embezzlement. You could go to prison. And if that happens, your child will go into foster care. The words hung in the sterile air like a death sentence. Claire looked at Rachel, then back at Garrett. How long do I have to decide? He wants an answer in 24 hours. After Garrett left, Claire and Rachel sat in silence. The heart monitor beeped steadily, marking time, marking the countdown to an impossible choice. There has to be another way, Rachel said finally. But Claire was thinking about the look on Derek's face when she had collapsed. The satisfaction. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had systematically destroyed every avenue of escape. The public humiliation was just the opening move. The fabricated evidence, the prenup, the defamation suit, it was all designed to corner her, to force her to disappear quietly with nothing. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table. A text from an unknown number, checkmate. Claire stared at it, feeling the last ember of hope dying in her chest. Derek Morrison had won, and he had enjoyed every moment of her destruction. The next morning, Claire discharged herself against medical advice. She couldn't afford another night in the hospital, and the walls were closing in. Rachel drove her to a small apartment in a neighborhood Claire barely recognized, far from the penthouse that had been her home. It's mine, Rachel explained. Guest room's yours for as long as you need it. The apartment was tiny but clean. Claire sat on the edge of the guest bed and stared at the blank wall. Her entire life fit into the overnight bag Rachel had packed for her. Everything else was in the penthouse. Legally Derek's property now. Her phone had become a weapon. Every notification was another cut. Social media had turned her into a villain. The embezzlement story had taken root. Former colleagues from the nonprofit were being interviewed, some defending her, but others expressing doubt. She did handle a lot of cash transactions, one former board member said on television. We never thought to question it. The doubt was spreading like poison. Within 48 hours, The nonprofit announced they were conducting an internal investigation into Claire's tenure. The director she had mentored, who she had trained, released a statement expressing shock and disappointment. Claire's bank accounts remained frozen. Pending the investigation Derek had triggered, she had $200 in cash and nothing else. Rachel worked her journalist contacts relentlessly, trying to find cracks in Derek's story, but every lead hit a wall. The documents looked legitimate. The bank records seemed real. Whoever had forged them was a professional. On the third day, flowers arrived. A massive arrangement of white lilies, the kind sent to funerals. The card read, "You deserve better, N.S." "Who's N.S.?" Rachel asked. Claire had no idea. That afternoon, Garrett called with worse news. Derek's restraining order had been granted. Claire was legally prohibited from contacting him, coming within 500 feet of him, or making any public statements about him. Violation would result in immediate arrest. "He's trapped you completely," Garrett said. "I'm sorry. Claire, I've been practicing law for 20 years, and I've never seen someone so thoroughly cornered." That night, Claire sat in the dark guest room, holding an ultrasound photo of her daughter. The 24-hour deadline was approaching. In the morning, she would have to give Garrett her answer, sign away her truth and her dignity for $50,000, or fight and risk losing everything, including her child. She thought about her daughter growing up, asking about her father someday. What would Claire tell her? That she had been too weak to fight, that she had let him win? But what good was fighting if it meant her daughter ended up in foster care while Claire sat in prison for a crime she didn't commit? There was a knock on the bedroom door. Rachel entered, carrying her laptop. "Claire, you need to see something." On the screen was an email from an unknown sender. "I know what Derek Morrison did to you. I know because he did it to me too. We need to talk. Nathan Shaw." Claire stared at the name. Nathan Shaw, tech billionaire, founder of Shaw Tech Solutions, one of the richest men in the country, and according to business journals, Derek's former college roommate and business partner. "What does he want?" Claire asked. "To meet with you. Tomorrow morning. He says he has information about Derek that can help you." "Why would he help me?" Rachel's expression was grim. "Because apparently, Derek destroyed him too. 10 years ago, Shaw and Derek started a tech company together. Derek stole the patents, kicked Shaw out, and sold everything. Shaw sued and lost because Derek had falsified documents showing Shaw had signed over his rights. Sound familiar?" Claire felt something stir in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but something. "Derek's done this before. Multiple times, according to what I'm finding. A former business partner in Atlanta, an ex-girlfriend who accused him of financial abuse. They all signed NDAs. They all disappeared quietly. You're just the latest." Claire looked at the ultrasound photo again, her daughter's tiny profile, her perfect little hand raised as if waving. "Set up the meeting," she said quietly. "I want to hear what Nathan Shaw has to say." That night, Claire's phone buzzed with another text from Derek's number. "Tick-tock, Claire, 10 hours left. Make the smart choice for once." She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and began documenting everything she could remember. Every conversation, every warning sign she had ignored, every moment when Derek had shown her exactly who he was and she had chosen not to see it. If she was going to fight, she needed to know her enemy. And Derek Morrison had just made his first mistake. He assumed she would break. He assumed she had nothing left. But a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of opponent. Nathan Shaw's office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in the financial district. Claire felt out of place in her borrowed clothes, her pregnant belly making every movement awkward. Rachel stayed close, protective and wary. The man who greeted them was younger than Claire expected, maybe 38, with sharp features and the kind of intensity that came from years of fighting battles. He dismissed his assistant and closed the door, leaving the three of them alone in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Thank you for coming," Nathan said. His voice was measured, careful. "I know you have no reason to trust anyone right now." "Then why should I trust you?" Claire asked. "Because Derek Morrison destroyed my life 10 years ago, and I've spent every day since learning how he operates." Nathan pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. "This is the patent filing for adaptive algorithm software. I created it in graduate school. Derek and I were roommates, best friends. I trusted him with everything, including my research. Claire looked at the documents on the screen, technical specifications, development notes, all dated a decade earlier. Derek convinced me to form a company together, but this, Nathan continued, said we'd be partners, build something revolutionary. I was so focused on the technology that I didn't pay attention to the legal structure. 6 months in, when we had our first major investor interest, Derek presented me with papers to sign, standard operating procedures. He said, I signed without reading them carefully. Let me guess, Rachel said. They weren't what he claimed. They transferred all intellectual property rights to him personally. When I realized what happened and tried to fight it, he produced emails I'd never sent, supposedly showing I'd agreed to the terms knowingly. He had fabricated an entire paper trail. I lost everything, the patents, the company, my reputation. By the time the lawsuit was over, I was bankrupt and blacklisted in the tech industry. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. So how are you here now? A ghost of a smile crossed Nathan's face. Spite is a powerful motivator. I spent 5 years working 3 jobs, rebuilding from nothing. I started ShawTech in the garage, doing contract coding work. I built it slowly, carefully, and I made sure Derek never knew I was rising again until I was untouchable. He pulled up another file. For the last 3 years, I've been investigating him, quietly, patiently. I know his methods, his patterns, his tells, and I know he's done this to at least 4 other people. All of them signed NDAs. All of them disappeared. Why are you telling me this? Claire asked. Because you're different. You went on that stage, you confronted him publicly, and that means he's more exposed than he's ever been. The scrutiny is higher. The stakes are bigger. If we're going to take him down, now is the moment. Rachel leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing? I have resources, lawyers, forensic accountants, investigators. I can fund a legal team that will match his dollar for dollar. We can tear apart those embezzlement documents and prove they're forged. We can find the people who helped him fabricate evidence and get them to flip. We can expose every lie he's ever told. Claire wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him, but she had learned not to trust easy promises. What do you get out of this? Justice, Nathan said simply. And the satisfaction of watching Derek Morrison face consequences for the first time in his privileged life. Over the next 2 hours, Nathan's team presented their preliminary findings. They had already identified inconsistencies in the bank records Derek had presented. The supposedly stolen funds had been transferred through accounts that didn't exist during Claire's tenure at the nonprofit. The emails had metadata showing they were created months after their supposed dates. This is all forgery, Nathan's lead attorney confirmed. Expensive, sophisticated forgery, but forgery nonetheless. We can prove it in court. For the first time in days, Claire felt hope beginning to bloom in her chest. How long will it take? 3 to 6 months to build a full case, but we can file immediately to block the defamation suit and challenge the restraining order. We can freeze his ability to control the narrative. Claire looked at Rachel, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Nathan. Why didn't you do this before? Why wait for me? Nathan's expression darkened. I tried, twice, both times. Derek used his connections to bury me. He got my company investigated by the SEC on false charges. He had investors pull out of my deals. He has powerful friends. Claire, senators, judges, media executives. Fighting him alone is suicide. But together we have a chance. Claire closed her eyes, feeling her daughter move inside her. She thought about the deadline, now just hours away. She thought about $50,000 in a lifetime of silence. Then she thought about her daughter asking, years from now, what her mother had done when the world tried to erase her. Okay, Claire said, opening her eyes. Let's fight. The relief on Nathan's face was visible. He immediately began making calls, mobilizing his team. Within an hour, new attorneys were drafting motions. Investigators were being dispatched. A PR firm was preparing a counter-narrative. Claire felt like she could breathe again for the first time in days. That night, Rachel drove Claire back to the apartment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Claire allowed herself to imagine victory, imagine vindication. Imagine her daughter growing up knowing her mother had been brave. She fell asleep with Nathan's words echoing in her mind. Together we have a chance. She didn't see the news alert that came through at midnight. She didn't know that Nathan Shaw's company had just been served with an SEC investigation notice, triggered by an anonymous tip. She didn't know that Derek Morrison's connections ran deeper than anyone had imagined. And she didn't know that her brief moment of hope was about to be crushed under the weight of Derek's nuclear option. Claire woke to frantic pounding on the bedroom door. Rachel burst in, phone in hand, her face emaciated. Nathan pulled out. The words didn't make sense at first. Claire sat up, pregnancy making the movement slow and awkward. What? Shaw Tech got hit with an SEC investigation at midnight. Stock fraud allegations. It's all over the news. Nathan called 20 minutes ago. He's shutting down all external projects, including helping you. His lawyers advised him that any association with the Morrison case right now could be seen as retaliatory, which could strengthen the charges against him. The hope that had bloomed just hours earlier withered instantly. Claire reached for her phone. 57 missed calls, hundreds of text messages. All the news sites were leading with the same story: billionaire under investigation for securities fraud. The articles barely mentioned Claire or Derek. This was about Nathan now, about allegations of insider trading and stock manipulation. The timing was impossible to ignore. Derek did this, Claire said quietly. Of course he did. He found out Nathan was helping you, and he activated whatever connections he has in government to bury him. Rachel's hands were shaking. Claire, the court hearing on the defamation suit is in 6 hours. We don't have a lawyer anymore. We don't have evidence. We have nothing. Claire stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city, waking up. Somewhere out there, Derek was probably having coffee, reading about Nathan's downfall. Satisfied with how easily he had neutralized the threat, her phone buzzed. A text from Garrett Price. Nathan Shaw's entire legal team has withdrawn. I cannot represent you alone against Morrison's resources. I'm sorry. You should take the settlement. Another text, this one from an unknown number. Last chance, Claire, sign the papers or face the consequences. Your choice. Not Derek's number, but she knew it was from him, or from Wendy, his PR manager, acting on his orders. Rachel sat down heavily on the bed. Maybe Garrett's right. Maybe you should take the settlement. $50,000 is better than prison. At least you'd have something to raise your daughter with. Claire thought about her daughter, about telling her someday that when the world had tried to silence her, she had let it, about teaching her that powerful men always win. So why bother fighting no? Claire said, Claire, be reasonable. You have no money, no lawyer, no evidence. You're going into court in 6 hours against a team of high-priced attorneys, and you're going to lose. Then you're going to face criminal charges. Then you're going to lose your baby. Is your pride really worth that? It's not about pride. Claire turned from the window. It's about truth, and I'm done letting him control the narrative. What are you going to do? Claire didn't have an answer. She just knew that surrender was no longer an option. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing up. The hearing was in a courthouse downtown. Claire dressed in the only professional outfit Rachel could lend her, a navy dress that almost fit. She walked into the courtroom alone. Rachel beside her, but no attorney at her table. Derek's side had 6 lawyers, expensive suits, leather briefcases, the machinery of wealth on full display. Derek himself sat in the front row, Brooke beside him, both of them looking confident and untouchable. The judge, an older woman named Patricia Hendricks, looked at Claire with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Morrison, you're appearing without counsel. I cannot afford an attorney, Your Honor, and the ones who agreed to help me have been pressured to withdraw. One of Derek's lawyers, a man named Richard Crane, stood smoothly. Your Honor, Mrs. Morrison is attempting to paint herself as a victim when in fact she is the defendant in a defamation case. She has made false accusations against my client, damaging his reputation and business interests. We have documentation showing a pattern of embezzlement during her previous employment, which she has denied publicly despite clear evidence. Judge Hendricks looked at Claire. Do you have any evidence to present that challenges the plaintiff's claims? Claire's throat was tight. The evidence was being prepared by attorneys who have now withdrawn due to external pressure applied by Mr. Morrison's connections. That's an outrageous accusation, Crane said sharply. Is it? Claire's voice was stronger now. Nathan Shaw offered to help me yesterday. Today he's under SEC investigation. That's not a coincidence. Mrs. Morrison, Judge Hendricks said, her tone warning. Without evidence, these are just allegations. Then let me speak, Claire said. Let me tell my side. Under oath. On record. Crane objected immediately. Your Honor, testimony without corroborating evidence is worthless. Mrs. Morrison is desperate and will say anything. But Judge Hendricks held up a hand. I'll allow it. Mrs. Morrison, you may make a statement for the record. Claire stood, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. Every eye in the courtroom was on her. She saw Derek's smirk, Brooks' bored expression, the lawyer's confidence, and she spoke. She told him about leaving her career to support Derek, about the prenup she had signed without understanding, about the kiss at the gala, the fabricated evidence, the systematic destruction of her reputation. She told them about the settlement offer, about the deadline, about Nathan Shaw's sudden investigation. She told them the truth, even knowing it wasn't enough. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Hendricks looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Morrison, your testimony is noted. However, without evidence to support your claims, I have no choice but to proceed based on the documentation before me. The hearing continued. Derek's lawyers presented their case with surgical precision. The forged emails, the bank records, witness statements from people at the nonprofit expressing doubt about Claire's integrity. It was overwhelming, convincing, and completely false. At the end, Judge Hendricks delivered her ruling. The defamation suit will proceed to trial. Additionally, given the seriousness of the embezzlement allegations, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. Claire felt the room spin. Criminal prosecution meant investigation, meant potential arrest, meant her daughter could be taken away before she was even born. As the courtroom emptied, Derek approached her. His lawyers tried to stop him, but he waved them off. He leaned close, his voice low enough that only Claire could hear. You should have taken the money, he said. Now you get nothing, except a prison cell. Claire looked him in the eyes. You won't get away with this forever. Derek smiled. I already have. He walked away, Brooke on his arm, leaving Claire standing alone in the empty courtroom. Rachel found her there 10 minutes later, staring at nothing. We should go. Where? Claire asked. Where is there left to go? That night, in the tiny guest room, Claire lay in the dark and felt her daughter moving inside her. She had 24 hours before the district attorney would likely file charges. 24 hours before her life ended in every meaningful way. Her phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number. You had your chance. Now you have nothing. Claire stared at the message, then slowly typed a response. I still have the truth. She sent it, knowing it was futile, knowing Derek would just laugh. But sometimes speaking truth into darkness is all you have left, even when the darkness is winning. Claire spent the night awake, sitting by the window, watching the city lights blur through her tears. By dawn, she had reached a numb acceptance. She would be arrested. Her daughter would be taken. Derek would win. Some stories didn't have happy endings. Rachel found her there at 7 in the morning. You need to eat something. For the baby. What's the point? Claire's voice was hollow. They'll take her anyway. Don't say that. We'll figure something out. A knock on the apartment door interrupted them. Rachel tensed. If that's the police already. But when she opened the door, it wasn't police. It was a woman Claire vaguely recognized. Younger, blonde, her makeup smudged like she'd been crying. It took Claire a moment to place her. Brooke Sullivan. Rachel moved to block the doorway. You have some nerve showing up here. I know. Brooke's voice was shaking. I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I need to talk to Claire. Please, it's important. Claire stood slowly. Every instinct told her this was another trap, another layer of Derek's cruelty. But something in Brooke's face, the fear, the desperation made her hesitate. Let her in, Claire said quietly. Rachel reluctantly stepped aside. Brooke entered, clutching a large purse to her chest like a shield. She looked around the small apartment, then back at Claire. I'm so sorry, Brooke said, and started crying. I'm so sorry for everything. Why are you here? Claire asked, keeping her voice neutral. Because I can't do this anymore. Because he's a monster. And I was too stupid and starstruck to see it. Brooke sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. Everything you said at the gala, everything you've tried to tell people, it's true. Derek is exactly who you said he is. Claire's heart started beating faster. What are you talking about? The embezzlement evidence. It's all fake. I know because I watched him work with his lawyers to create it. They spent weeks building a false paper trail, creating fake emails, forging bank records. I was there in his office when they finalized it. I thought it was just business, just protecting himself from a vindictive ex-wife. That's what he told me. Rachel had her phone out, recording. Keep talking. But then after the gala, after you collapsed, I saw who he really was. He laughed about it. Rachel. He called me that night and laughed about how perfectly it had gone, how you'd played right into his hands by confronting him. He said you were weak and predictable. Brooke pulled a flash drive from her purse. I started paying attention after that, started recording conversations, started saving emails. I have everything. Him admitting to fabricating the evidence, him bragging about manipulating Nathan Shaw's SEC investigation, him planning what he'd do next to destroy you completely. Claire took the flash drive with shaking hands. Why are you doing this? Brooke's face crumpled. Because 2 days ago, I told Derek I was having doubts about us, about how he treated you, and she pulled down the collar of her shirt, revealing bruises on her collarbone. He showed me what happens when people question him. Then he told me if I ever tried to leave or talk to anyone about him, he'd destroy me the same way he destroyed you. He'd release fake revenge porn, claim I was a prostitute, ruin my entire life. He has the resources to do it, and he would. Rachel was already plugging the flash drive into her laptop. How do we know this isn't another setup? You don't? Brooke said simply, but I'm giving you everything anyway. Because I'd rather face whatever he does to me than live knowing I helped him destroy an innocent woman and her baby. For the next hour, they listened to recordings that made Claire's skin crawl. Derek's voice, casual and cold, discussing exactly how he had manufactured evidence against her. Conversations with his lawyers about building an airtight false narrative. Emails to Wendy Blackwell with instructions on which media outlets to feed specific lies. And most damning, a recording from just 2 days earlier. Derek's voice, Claire Morrison is finished. Even if she somehow finds a way to fight, I've made sure every door is closed. Shaw is neutralized. Her accounts are frozen. Her reputation is destroyed. She has nothing and no one. By next week, she'll be facing criminal charges. And by next month, she'll sign whatever I want just to avoid prison. That baby will be born while she's bankrupt and broken, and I'll have won completely. Another voice. Wendy, what if she doesn't break a Derek? Laughing. Everyone breaks eventually. Especially women like her who think dignity matters more than survival. She'll learn. The recording ended. Claire sat in stunned silence. Rachel was already on her phone, calling Garrett Price. Brooke wiped her eyes with arm. There's more on there. Tax fraud, bribery, offshore accounts, everything he's done wrong for the last decade. It's all documented. Why did you record all this? Claire asked. Because I finally realized I was dating a sociopath, and sociopaths don't let people leave. I needed insurance. Brooke's laugh was bitter. I just didn't expect to use it to save someone else. Garrett arrived within the hour. When he heard the recordings and saw the documentation, his expression transformed from defeated to energized. This changes everything. This is admission of fraud, conspiracy, and about 6 other felonies. Will it be enough? Claire asked. It's more than enough. This is smoking gun evidence. We can file emergency motions today, get the defamation case dismissed, get criminal charges filed against him instead of you. Garrett was already making calls. Claire, you're not just going to survive this. You're going to win. By noon, Nathan Shaw's lawyers had called. With the new evidence showing Derek had orchestrated the SEC investigation, they were back in Mo. Nathan himself showed up at Rachel's apartment that afternoon. I'm sorry I left you hanging, he said to Claire. I let him intimidate me into abandoning you. That won't happen again. Claire looked at Brooke, who was still sitting on the couch, looking small and terrified. What happens to you now? I don't know, Brooke admitted. He'll try to destroy me, but at least I'll be able to live with myself. Rachel put a hand on Brooke's shoulder. You're staying here, with us. We protect our own now. By evening, Garrett had filed emergency motions with the court. The evidence was submitted under seal to prevent Derek from destroying anything before the authorities could act. The district attorney's office had been contacted and was reviewing the recordings. For the first time in weeks, Claire felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Real hope, backed by evidence and allies. As the sun set, she stood at the window again, but this time she wasn't crying. She was planning. She was preparing. Derek Morrison had built his victory on lies and intimidation. Now those lies were about to burn his entire world down. The news broke at dawn. Morrison Properties CEO under federal investigation for fraud and conspiracy. Claire watched it unfold from Rachel's apartment, surrounded by her sister, Brooke, Nathan, and Garrett. Every major network carried the story. The recordings had been leaked to the press, probably by someone in the district attorney's office who wanted to ensure Derek couldn't intimidate his way out. His voice, cold and calculated, admitting to fabricating evidence against his pregnant wife, played on loop across every channel. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Morrison Properties stock went into freefall. Trading was halted after a 40% drop in the first hour. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. By noon, they had issued a statement. Derek Morrison had been removed as CEO, effective immediately. Major clients began terminating contracts. The Riverside Tower development, Derek's flagship project, lost its primary investors. 3 separate lawsuits were filed by former business partners who had signed NDAs but now saw an opportunity to come forward with their own stories of Derek's fraud. Claire's phone rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, advocacy groups. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to get her story, to offer support. But Claire wasn't ready to speak publicly yet. First, she wanted to see Derek's face when his empire collapsed. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 o'clock. Judge Hendricks had moved it up from the following week after reviewing the new evidence. The courtroom was packed with media, supporters, and the simply curious. Derek arrived flanked by only 2 lawyers now, down from 6. He looked smaller somehow, his confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. Brooke had told them he'd spent the previous night making increasingly frantic calls to contacts who suddenly weren't answering. Wendy Blackwell, his PR manager, had already resigned, posting a public statement apologizing to Claire and admitting she had been complicit in Derek's campaign of lies. Judge Hendricks entered, and the courtroom fell silent. This is an emergency hearing regarding evidence newly submitted in the matter of Morrison versus Morrison, she began. I have reviewed the recordings and documentation provided by Ms. Brooke Sullivan. I have also been informed that the district attorney's office has opened a criminal investigation into Mr. Derek Morrison for fraud, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. Derek's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we move to exclude this evidence as it was obtained without Mr. Morrison's knowledge or consent. Motion denied, Judge Hendricks said sharply. Ms. Sullivan was in a relationship with Mr. Morrison and present for conversations he chose to have in her presence. There is no reasonable expectation of privacy for criminal conspiracies discussed with accomplices. She turned to Derek directly. Mr. Morrison, I have rarely seen such a deliberate and malicious campaign to destroy another person's life. You fabricated evidence, manipulated the legal system, and attempted to use this court as a weapon against your wife. Derek tried to speak, but Judge Hendricks continued. The defamation suit against Mrs. Morrison is dismissed with prejudice. The restraining order is vacated. Furthermore, I am ordering you to pay Mrs. Morrison's legal fees in full and awarding her temporary spousal support of $20,000 per month until the divorce is finalized. Gasps filled the courtroom. Derek's face went white. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association regarding your attorney's conduct in presenting fabricated evidence to this court. Mr. Morrison, you are fortunate that the criminal charges are being handled by the district attorney's office, because if they weren't, I would hold you in contempt and order your immediate arrest. Claire felt tears running down her face, but she wasn't sad. She was overwhelmed by the weight of validation, of justice finally being served. After the hearing, the crowd outside the courthouse was massive. Supporters held signs reading "Justice for Claire" and "Believe Survivors." Media trucks lined the street. Garrett stood with Claire on the courthouse steps. "Are you ready to make a statement?" Claire looked at the sea of cameras and faces. A month ago, they had been recording her humiliation. Today, they would record her vindication. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." She stepped to the microphone. Rachel on one side, Brooke on the other. Two women who had survived Derek Morrison in different ways, standing together. "My name is Claire Morrison," she began, her voice steady. "And I want to tell you what happens when a powerful man decides to destroy a woman who trusted him." She spoke for 10 minutes. She told them about the betrayal, about the fabricated evidence, about being cornered into an impossible choice. She told them about Nathan Shaw and the others Derek had destroyed over the years. She told them about Brooke's courage in coming forward despite the cost. "This isn't just about me," Claire said. "It's about every person who has been silenced by money and power. Every person who signed an NDA because they had no other choice. Every person who was told their truth didn't matter because someone richer said otherwise." The crowd erupted in applause, but Derek Morrison tried to erase me, Claire continued. "He tried to make me disappear quietly, to take nothing and be grateful for it. But I'm still here. My daughter is still safe, and his empire is burning." More applause. Louder now. "To anyone else facing something like this, I want you to know you don't have to stay silent. You don't have to accept injustice. It's terrifying to fight, and you might feel like you have nothing left to lose. But sometimes having nothing left to lose is the most powerful position you can be in." She stepped back from the microphone as the crowd roared its approval. Reporters shouted questions, but Garrett fielded them, giving Claire space to breathe. That night, the recordings dominated every news cycle. Derek's cold, calculated voice admitting to fraud played alongside footage of Claire's courthouse statement. Public opinion, which had been split, consolidated overwhelmingly in her favor. By morning, the hashtag Justice for Claire was trending worldwide. A GoFundMe for her legal expenses raised $200,000 in 24 hours. Law firms offered pro bono representation. Advocacy groups reached out about starting a foundation to help others in similar situations. Derek, meanwhile, had been arrested, released on bail, but facing multiple felony charges with more likely to come as the federal investigation expanded. His empire, built on lies and intimidation, was collapsing faster than anyone had imagined possible. And Claire Morrison, the woman he had tried to destroy, was still standing. 3 months later, Claire sat in a coffee shop near Rachel's apartment, reviewing documents for the foundation she was building, the Morrison Survivors Fund, designed to help people escape abusive relationships and fight back against wealthy predators who use the legal system as a weapon. The name had been deliberate. She had reclaimed Morrison, transformed it from a symbol of her humiliation into something that would help others. Her daughter, Hope, slept in a carrier beside her, born healthy at 39 weeks. With her mother's dark hair and what Rachel swore was already a stubborn expression, Claire looked at her and felt grateful every single day that she had fought instead of surrendered. The divorce was finalized. Derek's legal troubles had made him eager to settle quickly. Claire received half of the marital assets, as she should have from the beginning. The prenup had been invalidated due to the fraud that preceded it. The money wasn't as much as it could have been. Derek had lost so much in the scandal, but it was enough. Enough to provide for Hope. Enough to start the foundation. Enough to build a new life. Brooke entered the coffee shop, waving. She looked different now, lighter somehow. She'd moved out of Rachel's apartment into her own place, was seeing a therapist, and had started a blog about recognizing emotional abuse. Her honesty about her role in Claire's pain had resonated with thousands of people who saw themselves in her story. "Sorry I'm late," Brooke said, sliding into the chair across from Claire. "Meeting with my lawyer ran long. Good news. Derek's trying to sue me for defamation now. My lawyer says it's a desperate move and won't go anywhere. But still," Brooke smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "He's not done trying to hurt people. He's facing 15 years in prison. Brooke, even if he somehow avoids conviction, his reputation is destroyed. He's not the threat he used to be. I know, logically, I know that, but I still check over my shoulder everywhere I go." Claire understood. She did the same thing. Trauma didn't disappear just because justice had been served. Some days were harder than others. Some nights. She still woke up from dreams where she was back on that stage, watching her life end in real time. But she was healing, slowly, with therapy and support, but healing nonetheless. Nathan Shaw arrived a few minutes later. Over the past months, he and Claire had developed a genuine friendship, built on shared experience and mutual respect. He had offered to fund the Morrison Survivors Fund, but Claire had insisted on building it independently. She needed to know she could do this on her own terms. "How's the little one?" Nathan asked, peering at Hope. "Sleeping through lunch, thank God. Rachel says I should enjoy it while it lasts." They talked about the foundation's progress, about the other survivors who had come forward as after Claire's story went public. 4 of Derek's previous victims had broken their NDAs, emboldened by Claire's example. Their combined testimony was strengthening the criminal case against him. "I heard Morrison Properties is filing for bankruptcy," Nathan said. "The company's going to be dissolved and sold for parts." Claire felt a complicated mix of emotions about that. The company had been Derek's legacy, his pride, but it had also been built partially on fraud and manipulation. Maybe it was right that it didn't survive him. "What about you?" Brooke asked Nathan. "Your SEC investigation officially closed last month. No charges filed. Turns out when you have clear evidence that the investigation was initiated through bribery and false statements, things get resolved pretty quickly." Nathan smiled. "Shawtech stock is at an all-time high. Apparently, standing up to Derek Morrison is good for business." They spent the next hour going over plans for the foundation's first major fundraiser. Claire wanted it to be different from the galas she'd attended with Derek. Less about spectacle and more about genuine connection and support. As they prepared to leave, a young woman approached their table hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Claire Morrison?" Claire tensed instinctively, but the woman's expression was kind. "I just wanted to say thank you." The woman continued. "I was in an abusive marriage for 3 years. I thought I had to stay because he had all the money and all the lawyers. But after I saw what you did, how you fought even when it seemed impossible, I finally found the courage to leave. I've been free for 2 months now, and it's because of you." Claire felt tears prickling her eyes. "I'm so glad you got out. How are you doing?" "Taking it one day at a time, boss, but I'm safe, and that's what matters." After the woman left, Claire looked at Brooke and Nathan. "That's why we're doing this. For people like her." Walking back to Rachel's apartment later, pushing Hope in her stroller, Claire thought about how different her life looked now compared to 3 months ago. She wasn't living in a penthouse anymore. She didn't have designer clothes or a personal assistant. She didn't attend exclusive galas or vacation in the Hamptons, but she had something infinitely more valuable: her integrity, her truth, her voice. Derek had tried to take all of that from her, and he had failed. That night, after putting Hope to bed, Claire opened her laptop to write. She was working on a book. Her full story. Everything Derek had done and everything she had learned about fighting back against powerful predators. Her phone buzzed with a news alert: Derek Morrison sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Claire read the article. The judge had been harsh in her sentencing remarks, calling Derek a danger to society and a manipulator who had shown no remorse. With credit for time served and good behavior, he might be out in 8 years. But 8 years was enough time for his victims to heal, to rebuild, to ensure he could never have that kind of power over anyone again. Claire closed the article and returned to her writing. She had more important things to focus on than Derek Morrison's fate. She had a daughter to raise, a foundation to build, and a future to create. A future where the truth mattered more than money, where justice was possible even when the odds seemed impossible, where a woman with nothing left to lose could become a woman with everything to fight for. 9 months after the courthouse victory, Claire stood in front of a mirror in her new apartment, adjusting the simple blue dress she'd chosen for tonight's event. Hope babbled happily from her playpen nearby, now old enough to sit up and grab at toys with determined little hands. Rachel appeared in the doorway. "The car's here. You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Tonight was the Morrison Survivors Fund's first major event, but not a gala. Instead, Claire had rented a community center and invited the people who mattered. The survivors, the allies, the ones who had stood by her when everything fell apart. No champagne towers or designer gowns, just real people, real stories, and real support. The center was already full when they arrived. Claire recognized faces from support groups, from online forums, from the dozens of people who had reached out after her story went public. Each one representing a battle fought, a system survived, a life reclaimed. Brooke was there, talking with a group of young women about recognizing red flags in relationships. She had become an unexpected voice in the survivor community, using her platform to educate others about how abusers could be charming and successful while still being dangerous. Nathan Shaw stood near the refreshment table, chatting with Garrett Price. Both men had become permanent fixtures in Claire's support system, though she'd been careful to maintain boundaries. She had learned the hard way about letting romantic relationships define her, and she wasn't ready to repeat that mistake. The evening began with Claire taking the small stage they'd set up. Hope was with Rachel in the back, but Claire could see her daughter's dark hair peeking over her aunt's shoulder. "Thank you all for being here," Claire began. "9 months ago, I was standing in a courtroom, broke and pregnant and terrified, thinking my life was over. My husband had systematically destroyed my reputation, frozen my assets, and manufactured evidence to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. He thought he had won completely." The room was silent, attentive, but he forgot something important. He forgot that I wasn't alone, even when I felt most isolated. My sister never stopped believing me. Brooke found the courage to come forward with evidence, despite the risk to herself. Nathan provided resources when I had nothing. Garrett fought for me even when the case seemed impossible. And hundreds of you reached out with support, sharing your own stories, reminding me that survival is possible. Claire paused, gathering her thoughts. This foundation exists because of all of you, because we deserve better than a system that protects the wealthy and powerful at the expense of everyone else, because silence benefits abusers, and we're done being silent. Applause filled the room, genuine and warm. Over the next 2 hours, several survivors shared their stories. A woman who had escaped a tech executive who stalked her for 3 years. A man whose business partner had stolen his life's work. A teenager who had reported assault and been threatened into recanting by the perpetrator's family lawyers. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same: powerful people using money and connections to escape consequences while their victims suffered in silence. Claire listened to each one, taking notes, making connections. The foundation was still small, but it was growing. They had helped 4 people with legal fees already, connected dozens more with resources, and were working on legislative advocacy to change the laws that made these abuses possible. During a break, Nathan found Claire refilling her water glass. "You've built something incredible here." "We've built it," Claire corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "Fair enough." Nathan hesitated. "I wanted to ask you something. No pressure, just a question." Claire braced herself, wondering if this was about to become awkward. "Would you consider letting me help fund a legal clinic, specifically for survivors who need representation against wealthy abusers? I know you wanted to keep the foundation independent, but this would be separate, a complimentary service." Claire smiled with relief. "That's a wonderful idea." "Yes, absolutely." "Good. I'll have my lawyers draw up the paperwork." Nathan looked around the room. "You know, when Derek destroyed my company 10 years ago, I spent a long time angry and bitter. I wanted revenge, wanted to hurt him the way he hurt me. But this is better than revenge. This is actually making a difference." "Spite can be a powerful motivator," Claire said, echoing Nathan's words from months ago. "But purpose is sustainable." As the evening wound down, Claire held hope and watched the survivors mingling, exchanging contact information, forming connections that would support them through the hard days ahead. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge, not destruction, but community and healing. Her phone buzzed with an email. The publisher wanted to know when the manuscript would be ready. Her book, tentatively titled "When Power Tries to Silence You," was due in 3 months. Claire had struggled with writing it at first, reliving the trauma in detail, but her therapist had helped her reframe it as a way to process what happened while also providing a roadmap for others. Rachel appeared with Hope's diaper bag. "She's getting fussy. We should probably head home soon." Claire nodded, but first she wanted to say goodbye to everyone personally. She moved through the room, thanking people for coming, collecting stories, making promises to follow up. A young woman stopped her near the door. "Ms. Morrison, I just wanted to say, I'm starting law school next semester because of you. I want to help people like us." Claire felt her eyes welling up. That's wonderful. Please stay in touch. We'll need good lawyers in this fight. On the drive home, Claire was quiet, processing the evening. Hope had fallen asleep in her car seat, her tiny fist curled around one of her favorite toys. You did good tonight, Rachel said from the driver's seat. We did good, Claire corrected again. I keep trying to remember that I didn't do this alone. True, but you were the one who refused to break. You were the one who stood on those courthouse steps and told the truth even when it would have been easier to disappear. That matters. Back at the apartment, after Hope was settled in her crib, Claire stood by the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Derek Morrison was in a federal prison, his empire destroyed, his reputation in ruins. She didn't think about him often anymore. He had taken enough of her time and energy. Instead, she thought about the woman who had thanked her at the coffee shop months ago, about the people at tonight's event, finding strength in shared experience, about Hope, growing up in a world where her mother had fought back instead of accepting injustice quietly. Claire's phone buzzed one last time before bed. A text from Brooke. Thank you for tonight, for everything. You saved my life by giving me a reason to do the right thing. Claire typed back, you saved your own life by choosing courage. I just provided the opportunity. She set the phone down and checked on Hope one more time, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. Hope would grow up knowing her mother's story, knowing that when the world tried to erase her, she had refused. That would be Claire's legacy. Not the scandal, not the humiliation, but the fight and the victory that followed. In the morning, there would be foundation work to do, therapy appointments to keep, a manuscript to finish. There would be hard days still, moments when the trauma resurfaced unexpectedly. Healing wasn't linear, and justice didn't erase pain. But tonight, standing in her small apartment, with her sleeping daughter nearby, and a purpose that gave her life meaning, Claire Morrison felt something she hadn't felt in over a year. Peace, not the false peace of ignorance or denial, but the earned peace that comes from surviving the worst someone can do to you and choosing to build something better from the wreckage. Derek had tried to teach her that power and money always win. Instead, she had learned that truth and courage can overcome even the most overwhelming odds, that silence might protect the powerful, but voices raised together can change the world, that having nothing left to lose is sometimes the first step toward having everything that matters. And that justice, real justice, isn't about revenge or destruction. It's about survivors refusing to stay silent, standing together, and proving that no one is too powerful to face consequences. That was the lesson Claire would carry forward, the truth she would teach her daughter, the legacy that would outlast the scandal and the headlines in Derek Morrison's failed attempt to erase her. She had survived. She had fought back. She had won. And now she would help others do the same.